A little background on the events I am going to write about. This all happened in mid-October. My family owns about 160 acres out in the middle of nowhere. The closest neighbor is a friend who we let rent the pasture for his cattle when he needs to. Some friends and I decide that we wanted to build a little cabin out there that we could hang out at. So, one weekend, one of my friends and I loaded up a tractor we were renting from his dad, and we headed out there. It was just me and him that weekend, as everybody else was busy. We got there a little late, since it took a while to get everything loaded and packed for the weekend. My friend started setting up our tent and I made our fire. As I did so, I made an odd discovery. There was a phone book from a few towns over. It's still in its plastic sleeve, right next to our fire pit. I picked it up and showed it to my friend. We both enjoyed scaring ourselves, and I made the comment that we aren't alone out here. We both laughed at it. Later that night, we're sitting around the campfire, talking and bullshitting. There was a big, bright moon that night, and a bit of a breeze which made whatever leaves were left rustle. It was a little creepy, but we enjoyed the atmosphere. We noticed, however, someone crossing through the middle of the field, their body just visible from the moonlight. At first, it was a little odd. My friend and I discussed for a few seconds if we should confront him, but I made the suggestion that he was probably just taking a shortcut across the field. Although I didn't really like it, it wasn't a huge deal. If we caught him doing it again, then we would confront him. The rest of the night passed pretty uneventful. We eventually got in our tent and laid down. We were probably 20 or so feet from the fire pit, which at that point was burning quite low. We talked for a few minutes, and then we go silent, trying to fall asleep. As we're laying there, we hear something. It sounded like quiet footsteps walking around the fire pit. We look at each other, silent. Then we hear a piece of wood get thrown on the fire and it flamed up a bit. I grabbed the shotgun I always keep in the tent and quickly racked it. We heard someone run away, but by the time we got out, they were too far. The rest of the weekend was pretty quiet, and the events of the first night seemed kind of dreamy to us. We just cleared out the area for the cabin, and cut and stacked the trees we cut for firewood. Next weekend, we get out there. My uncle was out there as well, and went to check his game cams. This is where it got much more worrying for us. My uncle told us he was pissed because someone had stolen the batteries and the SD cards out of the cameras. We told him about what happened the weekend before, and then we parted ways. When we got out there, we noticed that quite a bit of our wood we had cut and stacked was already gone. And we were the last people to camp out there, which means someone had come out and cut themselves a fire. We then went and checked on the tractor, which we had left down there. We found it had been broken into, and the chainsaw which we left in the cab had been stolen. To make a long story short, nothing else far has happened. I was hesitant for a few weeks to continue with the cabin, since we weren't there all the time. I was worried it would be an incentive for whoever it was out there to stay. If for some reason anything else happens, I'll post an update. Let me preface this story by giving an explanation of our street and house, for imagery's sake. Our street is off of another street, and after a sharp curve, near the start, you drive down a straightaway for about 3/4 of a mile, and then there's an elongated U-shape to the road that leads to the cul-de-sac, which will come into play a bit later in the story. Anyway, our house is about halfway down the straightaway, and from the back door, you walk directly into the dining room, and to the left is the laundry room and a game room that has a side door. There is an opening near the game room door that is our living room, and you turn left and there is a foyer where our front door is. My room is directly straight down the hallway, and my mother and stepdad's room is just to the left, with the guest room to the right. Now that that is out of the way, let's begin. This all happened around late September and early October of 2016. I am a sophomore in high school, and at this point, I would go to bed at about 10 o'clock p.m. That way, I wouldn't be too tired for school the next morning. This night, I wake up in the middle of the night and check my phone to see what time it is. It's around 2:30, so I lay back down. But as I do this, I see a figure in the hallway, directly in the center of where the 3 doors are, but back a little. Now, some nights my stepfather would wake up and get a drink at night, so I thought it was him, and I just assumed he heard me and was checking up. I lay there and watch him for whatever reason, and I just pretend to be asleep. And this guy, who I think is my stepfather, is just standing there. After what felt like a good 5-10 minutes, he's still just standing there. He then puts his hand on the wall. This wall has a thermostat, so I calm myself down a bit and tell myself that it's just him changing the temperature. At this point, the guy's hands make a noise on the wall, and my English bulldog, Ruby, perks her head up. She likes to bark at men she doesn't recognize. She barks at my stepfather, but I figured that they were just playing, and then she starts a very low growl. The man, who I thought was my stepfather, as calmly as he could, turns around and walks out the back door. Maybe 30-45 seconds later, my stepfather walks out of his room and goes to the fridge. I get up and ask him if he heard the door, and he hadn't. I go to look, and someone had apparently forgotten to lock our back door. I am freaked out, but I go back to bed. Flash forward to a couple days later, and several police cars show up in our driveway, get out and point their guns over our neighbor's fence, looking for the neighbor's son. Apparently, the same night I saw the guy in my hallway, there was a party at one of the houses on the cul-de-sac I mentioned earlier, and one of the partygoers was stabbed. I overheard my neighbor saying that she woke up and didn't know where her son was, as he lived with her. So, she walked outside to see if his car was still there, as he had a black car and parked right outside of their porch light. But instead, she saw him come from the direction of our backyard. He proceeded to tell her that he was going to a party with some friends and left in the direction of the cul-de-sac. An officer told my mom that he showed up at the party and left 30, 45 minutes later, and about 5 minutes after he left, they found the guy who got stabbed in the bathroom. Obviously, I told my mom to mention what I saw to the officer, and she did, and the officer said they would look into it, but we didn't hear anything else about it. After, I wasn't sure who I saw that night, but now I am certain it was our neighbor's son. I don't think they ever ended up finding him either. I just hope that he doesn't hurt anybody else, because he's obviously not above it.